equally appreciative, honored to welcome you to the forum, and equally appreciative of the fact that you all thought that it was worthy of yourself to be here. So thank you. Thank you very much. We know that you'll likely have a lot of questions, and we intend to answer all of them during the question and answer session after the presentation. Please take notes, make note of any questions so that you won't forget them, so that you can ask them at the end of the presentation. Before I introduce our Chief Operating Officer, Barry Hall, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session is going to last about 90 minutes. We might get wrapped up early. We do have an hour and a half that's set up to do what we wanted to do tonight. Also, we are recording today's presentation so that you and others can watch it later. Even for the question and answer period, we are looking at, if you'd like for us to transcribe those so that you can have a copy of the questions and answers as well. And we'll publish a summary of those questions and answers after. Now, the order of today's workshop will go like this. Our COO, Barry Hall, will present an overview of Columbia Housing, and that's what we do at the agency, the significance of that work in the community. He will give you an overview on that. He'll also emphasize the importance of the relationships between the landlords and Columbia Housing. Very, very important. Then you're going to hear from Candace Tollison. She's our Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Many people remember that program is formerly Section 8, and so she will talk about that. Her program is where the majority of the landlords participate. And so after Vice President Candace Tollison's presentation, we have asked the homelessness administrator, homeless program administrator, Ashley Weston, to talk to you about other ways that landlords might want to participate in our program. It's a very interesting program that Ashley will talk about. Barry Hall, our Chief Operating Officer, is relatively new to Columbia Housing. But Mr. Hall, well, he's not new to the industry. He's a 24-year veteran of the public housing industry, and his career began first as a contractor with the Housing Authority for the city of Austin, Texas. And throughout his career, he has served in every aspect of the industry, from maintenance to executive administration, focusing on operational efficiency. That's why we snapped him up. Before coming to Columbia Housing, Mr. Hall's latest role was the Executive Director of the Hall County Housing Authority in Grand Island, New Hampshire. There he implemented sound policies and procedures that aligned with HUD's statutory and regulatory requirements, and he worked to make sure his agency was accountable, with a well-trained staff and a good public image. He was hired by Columbia Housing as their COO in June of this year. Please welcome Mr. Barry Hall for the overview, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Ms. Hardy. And thank each and every one of you tonight. I see some really nice faces tonight. On behalf of our CEO, Ivana Bing, and our Board of Commissioners, I want to thank each and every one of you for your interest in serving as a landlord in Columbia Housing Choice Voucher and Housing First Permanent Supportive Housing Program. That's a mouthful. Also, Ms. Bing sends her sincere apologies for not being able to be with us tonight. She has other commitments. I want to share a little bit of information about our agency and our service footprint in the city of Columbia and Richland County. Columbia Housing has a $50 million annual operating budget that provides affordable housing to more than 16,000 residents in Richland County, making Columbia Housing the single largest affordable housing provider in the state of South Carolina. The agency serves over 16,000 residents through its public housing program, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and other non-conventional affordable housing programs. Here's another fact and nugget for you. Every year, Columbia Housing pays out millions to landlords. In fact, during our last fiscal year, we topped $36 million in landlord payments, which is a substantial contribution to the local economy. In addition, more than 1,000 landlord partners. Columbia Housing has cultivated partnerships with over 200 community organizations, service providers, and grassroots programs to provide wraparound services to residents whose needs exceed that of affordable housing. So over the next 5 to 10 years, Columbia Housing will be looking to reposition its public housing portfolio, renovating existing units and building new communities. This is responsive, an ongoing dialogue with all landlords in its portfolio. After tonight's presentation, feel free to ask questions, raise issues, and provide feedback for anything you think will make our programs better and Columbia Housing more responsive to your needs. We appreciate your interest in our landlord opportunities, and we thank you, and we are honored for you to be here again with us tonight. Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Ms. You guys, when we posted online that we were going to have this workshop, it filled up within 24 hours, and so we thought that was a really, really good sign. And so we appreciate people being so receptive. It also made us look at when we would have the next one, which will be on December 15th. And so if you know people, and so we were real strict this time, right? So once we got to 40, that was it. And we said, well, what about attrition? You know, because usually people sign up, everybody doesn't show up. So we thought what we do this time is just take a look and see how that worked out. So if we have capacity for 40 next time, maybe we'll register 55 so that we can fill the room. But we're so delighted to see you all, here today. And again, it's encouraging the level of interest, because we certainly know the need in our community for people to have safe and decent places to live. The success of our programs depend on the participation of our landlords. You guys have heard Mr. Hall say that. And so we know today's critical to have you guys as partners, because we're looking at 2 of our housing programs that you're going to hear about tonight, where landlords specifically make those programs successful. We really have to have strong partnerships with good landlords for those people to be for us to be successful and serve people the way we need to. And we also want you to know that our current administration, our COO, Mr. Barry Hall, and our CEO, Yvonne Devine, are very committed, as he mentioned earlier, to maintaining that open, responsive, and ongoing dialogue with each of you all. But right now, I'm going to ask our Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, Candace Tollison, to walk us through the important information about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. Ms. Tollison.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hardy, and thank all of you again for being here tonight. It is very important, and I'm super excited to see so many people attend this because it is important what we do. So it's good to see that there are landlords out there that are interested. The topics that we are going to cover tonight is what a housing authority is, what the benefits are to being a landlord, what the requirements are, what the responsibilities are for the landlord, the tenant, and the housing authority, and the payment standards, rent reasonableness, and affordability, as well as unit standards and HQS. A housing authority is a local administrative agency that provides housing assistance programs that are funded through the federal government. Congress is the one that appropriates the funding. The funding is given to HUD, who passes it down to the housing authority to administer the program. And some of the landlord benefits. The benefits to being a landlord, the first one is what I think that all of you will say is very important. The predictable rental income. And the thing that I think about when I think about that bullet point right there is during the pandemic, when you had the moratorium out there and you weren't able to collect rents necessarily from families. The families were maybe lost their job or something like that, so they weren't able to pay rents and you weren't able to take any action. Well, the good thing about the housing authority is during that time we continued to pay our landlords. And our landlords, our participants portion of the rent is based on their income. So when they lost their jobs, we were able to pick up where they weren't able to fulfill that commitment. So I know that that is a very big one for everybody. The next thing is competitive advantage. Taking the housing choice voucher opens up a whole new market of potential tenants. We have approximately 150 tenants every month looking for housing. And you get free advertising. You can advertise your unit on South Carolina Housing Search. We also partially screen the tenants. When a tenant comes onto or the participants, when the participant comes onto our program, we look back 5 years for any drug-related or violent-related criminal activity. We also look to see any history that they have under federally funded housing. Now, this doesn't mean that the landlords shouldn't continue to do their screenings, because we definitely encourage landlords to screen the tenants as they would. You could see reduced vacancy rates. A study was recently done in 2021 by HUD that shows that the average tenant will stay in a unit for between 8.5 and 9 years. So you could see a reduced vacancy rate. You would be able to request reasonable annual rent increases, and you have the opportunity to help low-income families. Columbia Housing also has a dedicated person, the landlord liaison, that gives you a point of contact with the Housing Choice Voucher program, and I'd like to introduce her right now. Her name is Shana Bryant. She's in the back of the room. She's standing. She's going to be your point of contact. I do have contact information for her, our inspectors, and our management team for the Housing Authority in the packets that you received there. Now, the requirements to be a landlord, the Columbia Housing Authority is required to confirm that the housing assistance goes to the owner, the legal owner, or the legal representative. So these are some of the things that we need in order to verify that information. We're going to need a state or federally issued ID, proof of ownership, or if you're a third party that is managing the property, we would need a copy of that management agreement. We also need a completed W-9 and verification of your EIN number or your social security number if you're an individual. And then we would want you to execute the direct deposit authorization form so that we can directly put those payments in your bank account. Now let's get to the basics. We provide rental assistance to low-income families in the Richland County area. Our jurisdiction is all of Richland County. The participants will pay up to 40% of their income, and then the subsidy pays the balance. The way it works is we pull families from a waiting list. Then we're going to determine if they're eligible for the program based on their income and their criminal background. If they're eligible, we issue them a voucher, and the voucher authorizes them to lease from you. The voucher size is based on the number of household members in the household, and generally it's 2 heartbeats per room, except in cases of opposite sex. So if children under the age of 5 would share a room, regardless of sex, but like over the age of 5, they would get a separate bedroom. Another thing to note is that a family may lease a larger unit than what's on their voucher. And they can also lease a smaller unit than what's on their voucher as long as it doesn't cause it to be overcrowded. What the Housing Authority does is we take what the voucher size is and the unit that the family locates, and we have to use subsidy standard based on the lower of the two. So if somebody has a 2-bedroom voucher and they find a unit that's a 3-bedroom within the payment standard, they can absolutely do that. But if they go down to a 2-bedroom, then that standard will go down to the 2. So I always tell my families, you can always go up, and the payments and the shopping estimate that we give them will be okay, but if they ever go down, we have to recalculate everything. So most families are gonna look for a larger unit. The maximum subsidy is based on the payment standards, which is 90 to 110% of the fair market rent. And the fair market rents are issued by HUD. The PHA inspects the unit based on the housing quality federal standards. And then we approve the rents based on whether they're reasonable and affordable. And we'll talk about that a little bit more further in the presentation. Now, there's 3 contracts in play when you're looking at working with the Housing Authority and our families. The contract with the families that we have is the voucher. That gives the family, it's a contract where the family, it details what the family obligations are. Then there's the HAP contract. That's the contract between the PHA and the landlord. That is the contract that allows us to make the payments to the landlord on the tenant's behalf. And then, of course, the other contract in play is the lease agreement, and that's the contract between the landlord and the participant. Okay, so now for the responsibilities. The Columbia Housing Authority has responsibility to determine if the family is income eligible and if they continue to be eligible for the program. We have to make sure that we calculate the tenant portion of the rent correctly, as well as the housing assistance payment. We have to certify that the units meet federal housing quality standard guidelines and take actions when the units are out of compliance. We pay the housing assistance to the landlords. Our portion is paid directly to you. The tenant pays their portion directly to you. The Housing Authority also has to take action when participants violate their family obligations. Those obligations are listed on the voucher, and I do have a copy of that in your packet if you are interested in what those obligations are for the family in detail. I'll give you some of the bullet points on the next slide. And then we have to administer the program in accordance with the HUD regulations as well as the Columbia Housing Authority's policies. Okay, the family's major responsibilities, they have to abide by the lease. They have to pay their portion of the rent as well as their utilities that they're responsible for. They're not to damage the unit beyond normal wear and tear. They need to abide by the requirements of the voucher. They need to provide income and family information to the Columbia Housing Authority and report any changes in income within 30 days. They need to secure the permission of the landlord and the Housing Authority before adding anybody to the unit. And of course, cooperate with the Housing Authority on inspections and annual re-examinations. The landlord responsibility, you're responsible for selecting the tenant and doing your background screenings. You're responsible to be in compliance with the housing assistance payment contract and maintain the unit in accordance with the federal housing quality standards guidelines. I do have a copy of inspection criteria as well as the inspection booklet in your packet that gives you the details on what those are. You also are responsible for collecting your tenant's portion of the rent, enforcing the lease and taking action when there are lease violations. And another important note, you cannot collect any money that the Housing Authority owes from the tenant. So that's a good important note there. Now, every time I bring up, I'm in a presentation and I bring up this payment standards slide, the first thing people do is they look at that dollar value that's up there. Fair market rents are published by HUD by October the 1st of each year. And the housing authority has to set their payment standards between 90 and 110% of what HUD says that fair market rent is. So on the top line, you see HUD's fair market rent. The Housing Choice Voucher Program has set its standards at 110% of the fair market rent. So we're trying to give the maximum amount that we can to the landlords and to the families. The payment standards are gross rents. That means that's the rent to the owner plus the utility allowance. A utility allowance is something that every family gets that has a utility burden. You identify what utilities that tenant is going to be responsible for, and we have studies that are actually in your packet as well, some worksheets that show what those dollar values are for each of those utilities. The utility study is done by a third party who goes to all of the energy providers in Richland County to determine what the average energy conservative household uses. So that's where those amounts come from. So to give you an example, if you're looking at the 2-bedroom, you see our payment standard is $1,371. Let's say that the utilities from the worksheets that I've provided come up to $200. That means the maximum amount of rent that I would be able to give to that unit for a family that doesn't have any income would be $1,171. But there is a catch to that too. We also have to check and make sure that the units are affordable for the tenant, and we have to make sure that the rents are reasonable. So the rent determination is really based on 4 criteria. The participant's income comes into play in their household composition because the participant can pay up to 40% of their income, and the household composition determines which payment standard we're going to use. We also have to look at rental market comparables. We have to look at units that are in the general area that are of the same size and have similar amenities. So we're not always able to guarantee the amount that you saw on the previous slide because some of the areas may not command that amount. So we have to look at the comparable units in the area. The other thing we need to look at again is the affordability for the participant because they cannot spend more than 40% of their income on their housing costs. Okay, unit requirement and HQS. The federal goal of the Housing Choice Voucher Program is to provide decent, safe, and sanitary housing at an affordable cost to low-income families. So housing quality standards consist of 13 key aspects of housing quality, performance requirements, and acceptable criteria. And next slide. And these are those key aspects. One thing I would like to add here is that in December of 2022, HUD did make it a requirement that you have CO2 detectors for any unit that has gas appliances or an enclosed garage. HQS enforcement, any life and safety must be completed within 24 hours. The most common life and safety fail that we have on an inspection is smoke detectors. So if you know you have an inspection coming up, go by there and make sure that the tenant hasn't taken them out, or put new batteries in, because that is the #1 item that fails. Other repairs must be made within 30 days. If you fail to make the repairs, it will result in abatement of the unit, which means that there will be a prorated reduction of the rent until the unit is brought into compliance. And that's a daily reduction of the housing authority's portion. The tenant must continue to pay their portion during that period. If the repairs are not made after 30 days of abatement, the HAP contract will terminate and that family will be allowed to move. Okay, that concludes my presentation, and again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Candace. And again, I know you guys have questions, and so just a few minutes after Ashley's done. In addition to landlord opportunities offered by our Housing Choice Voucher Program that Candace Tollison just told you about, Ashley Weston will now come. She's the Housing Program Administrator, and she's going to talk about housing and landlord opportunities for some of our most vulnerable citizens. Ashley Weston.
On the mic. Hey. So my name is Ashley. I am the Homeless Program Administrator for our Permanent Supportive Housing First program. So I have the privilege of working with one of the most vulnerable populations, so families and individuals experiencing homelessness, and they also have a disability. Under our program, we administer a total of 5 grants, equaling out to about 73 units. We have a total of 4 grants that are funded by HUD, so that's our chronic grant, our disabled grant, expansion and expansion plus. I also have one funded by the city, which is our housing opportunity for persons with AIDS, that's HOPA. We also are partnered with the USC Supportive Housing and Midlands Area Consortium for Homeless, which is MOM. So upfront, I want to tell you the benefits of being a landlord for my program. Off top, you get an oversight person, which is me, to help manage the properties. Along with that, you get reimbursement for tenant cost damages up to 1 month's worth of rent with me. You're also eligible for 2 months worth of rent for a security deposit payment. And my team and myself also do quarterly non-HUS inspections to make sure your home is being maintained. So you guys heard a lot about HCV tonight, so I want to make sure that I distinguish the difference between permanent supportive housing and housing choice voucher. A really big one off top is the lease. The lease is signed by me, so automatically Columbia Housing is obligated for that unit. Versus with HCV, the tenant signs the lease, so the tenant is responsible for that unit. The next big thing is payment standards. So HCV does 110% versus my program can only do 100%, and I'll show you that difference when we go to the next slide. The next one is utilities. So utilities are also placed into Columbia Housing's name, which means that Columbia Housing pays them every month. We make sure that the water and lights stay on. The next one is damages caused by the tenant. It's a really important one, so we are responsible for that unit. We do reimburse any tenant cost damage. This one is very, very important, and I want to distinguish it, is that we do a limited kind of background check. This is a population who they got to be homeless because life wasn't so great, and sometimes that may be because of criminal activity that took place. We do not deny eligibility for our program for certain criminal activities versus HCV does do a more thorough background check than we do. We do offer case management and supportive services versus HCV does not, and we do annual housing quality standard inspections versus biannual. Okay, so this is the important part of the 100% versus the 110. So great thing about my program though is I got set utility amounts that I pay every month. So I can tell you up front what I can pay for a unit based off the bedroom size. I barely see 0 bedrooms, so I'll skip over that one and go straight to the 1 bedroom. So off top, I can pay $1,010 for a 1 bedroom. For a 2 bedroom, I could pay $1,096, and for a 3 bedroom, I could pay $1,295. Okay. So let's talk about how the program actually runs. So we go through the process of you guys calling me, saying, hey, I want to lease up with you. We go through the inspection process. I sign the lease. Automatically, Columbia Housing is responsible from there. I pay your security deposit. From there, I put all the units in all the utilities into Columbia Housing's name, make sure they get paid every month, and then me and my team, we select a participant for that unit. Now, every landlord's different. Some people, okay, Ashley, I trust you to put somebody in my house that ain't gonna tear it up. And then I got some landlords that's like, nah, I'm gonna run my own background check, which is fine. I'll pay for that application fee as well for you guys to do that. The only thing I ask is that for the credit, you don't take it into consideration for the approval or denial process because Columbia is responsible for the financial obligation for that unit. After that, let's say you approve them. They come to orientation with me and my team. We do a very thorough orientation, y'all, with them because a lot of times homeless people need to know the difference between being on the streets and being in your home. So we make sure we explain that thoroughly. We also have them enter into a sublease agreement with us. So they agree to our program terms along with the terms of your lease by signing that sublease. We also give them in black and white a copy of the lease that I signed, so they know the terms. They're in your unit. So from there, I'm also managing the property with you. So me and my team, we go out, any type of maintenance things we see, we report, or the tenant reports. We also do our annual and quarterly inspections again. Any damages that caused by the tenant, you guys give me an invoice, we get paid. And then case management, we offer supportive services in case management, and that's a really big reason that this program is so successful, is because of our case management. My case management team does budgets every month with their families to go over what they can and cannot afford to make sure their finances are being managed properly. They also provide supportive services as far as transportation. If they take them to the doctor, or they'll give them bus passes, or they'll set them up with a service that can get them where they need to go. They make sure that if they want to go to school, we partner with Milk City, so they refer them out for that. Every year we do a recertification with them, so they sit down and see where they started and where they are a year later. And we do what we can do to make it work for them. They also conduct quarterly inspections with me, just to make sure the unit is being upheld. That is it for me.
Thank you. So we're gonna ask Ashley and Candace and Mr. Hall to go up to the podium, because now we can start the Q&A piece. I do want to make sure everybody does understand the difference between what Ashley's talking about with the homeless program and the basic housing choice voucher program. Because they got a lot of perks in the homeless program, but you can certainly understand the need for the case management and all those other things to be successful. And with that, we will open it up for questions now. And Mr. Hall, if you can just field your questions.
Okay.
Oh, okay, we can go then. Nobody has to-
I actually have a question. For the, I know you guys said you have at least, I think it was 150 tenants a month or something. So when it comes to just connecting the landlord and tenants, do you guys do any kind of housing fairs to connect those tenants?
We encourage our landlords to list their properties on the South Carolina Housing Search website. That is a free site for landlords and tenants, so there's no cost. But I do like the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am?
I have a question for Ashley. What is your turnover rate for homelessness?
As far as like when they move into the unit?
Yes, I mean, if they don't keep it up and we have to dismiss them or something to that aspect. Do you have a lot of turnover because they don't take care of the property?
Oddly enough, no. It's not because, that's not why I would have turnover, no.
That is not a reason.
No, so it's actually a very low turnover rate. I have one person who's been in their unit for 8 years now, and they have like a thick file. So no, that's not why long turnover will be. Most of the time, our tenants decide that they would rather be homeless than to be in a stable place.
They would, okay.
So we had another question, yes, sir?
Yes, on the homeless program, am I understanding this, you're saying that you have a list of homeless people that you've already qualified, and when the landlord lists their property on your website, you match it up?
No, yes and no. So yes, there is a list that is managed by United Way of homeless individuals in Columbia and Richland County. We pull from that list in order to select for the property, but as far as the property itself, it's more so of a me thing. So when I go on the website, if you have something posted and it's fit between my payment standards and I can afford to pay what you're asking for every month, then I'll call you and say, hey, I have this lot, I'm willing to do a lease, are you willing to do a lease with me? And we'll go from there. So the tenant does not have any involvement with the actual lease process. They come in so more so of living there, because we cover everything. We cover the rent and the utilities.
Okay.
Did I answer it? I'm sorry, I went around the circle. Did I get your question?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
You did.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Under the homeless program, you said that you know exactly what the utilities are, so there's no deduction from that spot.
So we have a set utility amount. We budget out in our grant what we can pay for each unit size. So we don't do it based off of the different use, like how HCB does it based off of what you're saying the tenant can pay, because it has to do what the tenant can afford. And our program, the tenant doesn't factor into it because we pay for everything.
So those, payment schedules you had
Mhm.
up there, that's the full amount that the landlord will receive?
Mm-mm.
So what's taken from that?
So for a 1-bedroom, I'm taking $100. For a 2-bedroom, I'm taking $150, and from a 3-bedroom, I'm taking $200.
Now, your lease is 1 year?
Yep, it's 1 year, and then in 60 days, 60 days prior to it expiring, I'll reach out to you and say, hey, you want me to still stay? And we'll sign a new one. If not, then I'll start the process of finding a different landlord and moving my client.
So, for that 1 year,
Mhm.
what if the tenant leaves like 6 months after the season? What does the landlord do? Do you have to start all over again?
No, me and you on the lease. I'm your tenant
For 1 year?
for 1 year. Yep, so if that person decides to leave, I'll ask you to flip the unit for me, and I'm gonna move someone else in.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right.
So, but you will still continuously get your rent payment, cause I'm still here.
So then, if we have to flip the unit, do you pay anything toward helping to get it back up?
Yes, ma'am, for all tenants cost up. So if my tenant flushes a hairbrush, send me an invoice. But not for normal wear and tear, I don't reimburse for it. But like for stuff like if there's a hole in the wall, or the smoke detector wires, they done yanked out, send me an invoice.
I think I saw from one of your earlier slides, that you would reimburse up to the first 1 month's rent. Is it maximum? So if they do $10,000 in damage, is it just that?
They see everybody in the room looking at me for that one.
So that's a HUD requirement, we have to follow certain regulations for that, and in part of the regulations, they're saying, from the particular grant funds itself, it's up to 1 month's rent.
Gotcha.
However, there is some program income that comes in, so a lot of times if it exceeds that 1 month's rent, we're able to pull some things from that program income that comes
Try to
in.
work with.
Yes.
Thank you, that was very professional, because I was like, girl, who's gonna pay you?
Thank you, Tanisha. That's Ms. Stewart, she's our Senior Vice President.
Yes.
of Residents and Strategic Initiatives.
I have one about, increases. Cause I know I had a tenant who just was bulking on that, she did not want the increase, so we ended up not renewing the lease. So, is there a way for, I mean, to me, it seems like you all should just automatically do the increase, but I know you don't, you're waiting on us to ask for one. So, are your tenants or your clients, are they well versed in, do they expect that there's gonna be an increase? Cause sometimes they just act so shocked.
So, these are two different programs.
Which one you asking for?
So is this for the housing choice voucher?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let Candace answer that.
It is a requirement under the HAP contract to request a rent increase 60 days prior to the effective date. You're not able to get a rent increase during that first initial year, but after that first initial year, you could. So if your lease is gonna be up, let's say December the 1st, you're gonna wanna make sure that you've requested that rent increase by October the 1st so that you can get it for the next calendar year. You're not limited to your lease dates. Just after that initial year, you can actually increase that rent at any time. So it is not anything that's automatic. We do have over 4,400 vouchers in our program, so it would be kind of hard for us to manage that, but it is a HUD requirement that you give us that 60-day notice. You also need to give your family a 60-day notice as well. So when you're notifying us, notify the family as well. So that, because sometimes if that rent increase is a very large increase, some of that could fall on the family. So you want to make sure that you've notified that family as well. Does that answer? Okay. Actually just asked me if rent reasonable falls into that. We do look at the comparables whenever you request a rent increase. We're gonna look at those units that are in the area and what they're getting. But we're not gonna look at the affordability again. So, when you do ask for a rent increase, I would ask that you think about the fact that if you go over the payment standard, we may be able to approve it because the rents have, as you all know, have gone a lot higher in the area. We may be able to approve it, but the family may not be able to afford it.
I have a
Stay there
question.
for a minute, she has a question.
Okay.
What about the delays in rent increase? I requested one 90 days before it was due. I didn't get a rent increase till 3 months after her lease was up.
We did have some issues with staff turnover and the fact that rent increases were processed a little bit later than desired. We have put new processes in place, so you should not see that going forward.
That's why I was asking about automatic. That was kind of what I was getting at there.
Yeah, I do know that there was a very big lag in getting those rent increases through the process, but that since has been resolved. So if you have any that are pending, please feel free to reach out to me. Personally, my contact information is in the folder that I provided. Again, I'm Candace Tollison.
While we're on that, still with rent increases, so if I buy a property and the previous landlord, the tenants were under housing, but the rent is really just, it hasn't been raised for a long period of time, and so it's really, under. So I come in and now I want market rent. So, are you all looking at that as
Yes.
well? That
Yes.
I'm a new owner, and so you're not basing it on what they were paying before, it's based on the market rent, because I'm the new owner.
Yes, we would absolutely look at that. You would have to still give us that 60-day notice, and the person could not be in their first initial lease term.
Okay.
Because the HAP contract transfers to the new owner.
Based on what she was saying, and I was listening to her, if you go with market rent and it exceeds what you're allowed to pay, and the tenant has to pay more, do you make some kind of adjustment in the tenant's qualifications to handle the increase in the rent?
Okay, at initial, when they initially come on to the program or lease your unit, the rent has to be affordable for them. If we do the calculation and it's not affordable, then we're gonna reach out to the landlord to see if we can negotiate that rent. The families in my program are given a shopping estimate, which is what we feel like is something that we would be able to approve as long as it passes the comparable test. Where we look at the comparable units in the area. Does that answer the question, or?
Well, and I guess I was saying, she was saying that she had to evict one tenant because they didn't want to accept the increase. And obviously, with the increase, their portion went up too.
Their portion doesn't always go up. I mean, the majority of the time, the housing authority is what absorbs that. I just like to make landlords aware that if you go above the payment standard at the time of the increase, then some of that could fall on the tenant. A lot of times it's not a problem if the tenant has income, but if it's a family that doesn't have any income or has very low income, they may not be able to continue to stay in that unit just for the affordability. But it's not anything that, we can't deny you a rent increase because it's not affordable for the tenant. The only time we can deny the amount that we pay for affordability is when that person first moves into that unit. But we do comparables. What we do is we have a software that we look in to see what units in that area are getting that have the same number of bedrooms and similar amenities.
And,
Oh. Yeah, and if it was something where the family couldn't afford that rent increase, we would encourage that family to give you the proper notice so that we could move that tenant to another unit.
okay, and pull in your comps, rental comps. Do you use your own comp sometime if a property is rented through Section 8? Do you use that as a comp, or it has to be conventional comps?
No, we use Social Serve and South Carolina Housing Search, and we also use, sometimes we will use some of the other platforms that are available to us, like Zillow and Truella.
I'm still on the rent increase. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. So, let's say the tenant has been in there a while, and I'm back to saying now I'm a new owner, so I'm coming in to get market, rent. And the tenant cannot afford their increase, their portion that's gonna increase. Can I, as the landlord, opt to just not require them to pay that increase on their part? But I want my part from housing now, but just.
You could, you wouldn't want to give the tenant the option to not pay a portion of the rent that is assigned. What I would suggest, if you feel like it's not affordable for that family and you really want that family to stay in your unit, when you get that rent notice, let us know and we can reduce it. And I mean, if you reduce the rent down, the tenant portion is gonna go down when you run into a situation like that.
But you're saying reduce your portion as well.
No, it wouldn't reduce our portion. If you reduced it down, it would
Okay.
reduce the tenant's portion.
Okay, wait a minute. Is it-
Yes.
Everybody.
Yeah, that's if you go over the payment standard, is when that most commonly happens. I mean, we have some landlords, that sounds like a situation you're in, that has had their rent set at $650 for the last 8 years. Hasn't asked for a rent increase or anything. I'm gonna tell you, HUD was very generous in October of 2022 with the payment standards. The payment standards have come up to market. It makes us very competitive with actual market now. So, you know, what's the bedroom size that you have?
It's 4.
Okay, for a 4-bedroom, what would you like for that unit?
1850.
We could probably get pretty close to that. And it not affect the tenant's portion. It really depends. The biggest variable, when it comes to the tenant's portion is the utilities that they're responsible for. If you look at the utility allowance schedules that I've given you, there's a dollar amount associated with everything that they have to pay, and that comes off of that payment standard.
So what are you saying that as long as you stay below that standard, there will be a problem for you all, you as a tenant?
I'm sorry, can you ask that question again, please?
I said, as long as the landlord request stays below the standard, then there will be a problem for you all, you as a tenant.
Yeah, it should not impact the tenant, but you do have to take into consideration that utility allowance. Because the payment standard is the rent, the total contract rent plus the utility allowance. So as long as you stay in that area, you're great. And I do need to qualify that. If you have a family that moves into your unit that qualifies for a 3-bedroom, And then they have people that move out of the unit, their voucher size is adjusted based on that. So at their next annual recertification, so let's say that they have somebody that moves out of the unit and goes to college and they don't want to keep that person in the household any longer, then what will happen is at their next annual recertification, we would drop their voucher from, say, a 3 to a 2, which drops their payment standard. So that is another time that the family may end up having more of a portion to pay because their voucher size dropped and they're in that larger unit.
I have a question. I may have missed it, but are all units required to have appliances?
No, they are not. The tenant can provide their own appliances. They do get a credit on their utility allowance for that, if they do have to provide their own.
So that reduces the landlord's portion?
It would reduce you would have a higher utility allowance, so there would be a lower amount that would be able to approve for the contract rent. It's like $25, I think. If the tenant has to pay, it's right at $25, they get an allowance for $11 or $12 for the refrigerator and maybe $13 for the stove. It's in the packet that I gave you under the utility allowances. You can see what those values are.
Another question?
Okay.
So I'm new to the voucher program, and I wanted to know, like, how long is the process? Like, once you apply, send in all the paperwork, how long is the process for both programs to be able to get the tenant in your property?
As far as my program, we have families that are looking for units, usually about 150 families a month that are out looking for units. And it's either new families that we've brought in, it's families that have ported in from other jurisdictions to our jurisdiction, or it could be just families that are moving from one unit to another. So it's usually not hard. The biggest thing is landlords listing their properties on South Carolina Housing Search, because that's where we direct families to go. And it changes daily because the landlords are the ones that control that site, if you think about it, because you're the ones that are listing your properties there.
For me, it depends. So are you asking like when am I gonna move someone in your unit or when am I gonna sign a lease with you?
I guess signing the lease, like, I guess we will list the property on the site or give you the information and then the tenant will reach out to you, or, so is it a listing on your site and then you will pick the property for the tenant that is in need for a property?
For me, the easiest, let's say you call me tomorrow and say, hey, I got this house, it's a 3-bedroom house. Can you come out and inspect it? So I am an inspector for my program as well.
Okay.
So usually I'm out within 48 business hours. I'm out to see your property. And usually if I pass it that same day, I'll ask you to sign a lease that same day with me. If I fail it, then, of course, you get a time frame to fix it for what I fail it for, and then I'll sign a lease. For me to move a tenant in, anywhere from 30 to 60 days, I'm trying to get it down, but right now that's my realistic time frame.
And I don't think that I really covered the time frame on mine. Our families have 90 days to find a unit once they're issued the voucher. Whenever you submit the request for tenancy approval, within 24 to 48 hours, we're letting you know whether that unit's going to be able to be approved as far as the affordability and the rent reasonable comparison. After that, we send it to our inspection company, who will reach out to you based on the dates that you tell us that unit's going to be available for lease. So they'll reach out to you to schedule that inspection.
And then after the inspection has been approved, then how long?
It should take 24 to 48 hours for us to reach out to you because the inspections are coming from a third party, and it takes a couple of days for them to get the passbook to us and for us to complete the processing of the file.
And Ms. Hollis brought up a great point. My program does not have a request for tenancy approval, so that is a skip step for me.
So after that step, how long before you get the check in the mail?
That is a very good question, and I know that we've had some hiccups with that this year as well. But we are putting new processes in place so that time, you should see that time getting shorter. The HAP contracts does allow the housing authority up to 60 days.
For me personally, we don't mail checks, so most likely I'll hand deliver, or we will direct deposit. Now, depending on if you have to stay, I'm gonna make a check, but I'll really direct deposit. But if you're in town, either me or my case manager will hand deliver.
Do y'all provide renter's insurance for your tenants?
If you require it in your lease, yes. That's for the homeless.
That is for the homeless program. The tenants, where our programs are the biggest difference is that the Columbia Housing Authority is the leaseholder in Miss Ashley's case, and then the tenants are the actual leaseholders in my case.
Do you have a shortage of vouchers at this time, or you feel like you have more vouchers out there than you can find properties for?
We are always looking for landlords and always looking for properties because we have families that are searching every month. It's either, like I said before, it's either they're newly admitted to the program. Right now, I am trying to issue 50 vouchers a month to families that are on our waiting list. Then we have maybe 20 to 30 families that are moving. And then we have another, 15 or 20 families that are moving from one jurisdiction to back to our jurisdiction. So on average, it's usually around 150, but I've seen it even higher than that. So there is definitely a shortage for housing, and that's why it's so important that you guys come today to hear about this information.
And for me, yes, I have more people in my population than I have units. That's mainly because a lot of landlords don't like my payment standard. Candace kind of outdoes me with what she's able to pay you guys every month versus what I'm able to pay. So yes, I am very short on units.
Does housing authority offer any incentive to the landlord or renting a property to the recipients?
You do? At one time, the Housing Authority did, during the pandemic, there were some waivers that HUD had issued that allowed us to offer some incentives, but at this point, since December of 2021, those waivers have expired and we don't offer any incentives. I'm correct in that?
Is that anything y'all consider?
Of course, we are considering looking at every option to be able to increase our landlord participation. It's like I had mentioned earlier, that we have some big plans for the future, and part of those plans include the increase in the number of landlords that we have in our program. So we will look at that, and those will have to come from different funds, more than likely, but we will look at that. Yes, sir.
What constitutes homelessness other than living on the street?
That's a really good
Because
question.
you've got 2 or 3 families living in one home because they was put out from one home and can't find nothing else.
That's a good question.
So if you got a second or third family living with a relative, are they considered homelessness?
For my program, so they would have to have been homeless for a year or a consistent year spanned out between 3 years. And homelessness necessarily, if they're living with a family member, that's more so called couch surfing, because you're not necessarily without a home. You got a roof over your head, technically. It's not your roof, but it
But
is.
it's creating hardship. It's overcrowded, it's creating hardship on the ones that's living there.
For my program, no. So you would primarily have to be on the streets or in the shelter, in your car, because we have to be able to verify that you were in a condition that qualifies for HUD as homelessness.
But not 2 or 3 families living in one house, and the owner of the house took family member in because they didn't have nowhere to go.
Because technically you're in a home. You're not. It's not your home. Like, that's a great thing. That's a great question. It's not your home, and technically they might be living with you, but they're in a place to stay. So that they were in like a family shelter, like family shelter on 2 Notch. If they were in family shelter, that's considered being homeless because you don't have anywhere to stay. You're in a facility. But staying with a family member technically qualifies, especially if they're there longer than 7 days. They have somewhere to stay.
Well, could that person qualify or apply for your voucher program?
For HCV? Or me? For
No,
me?
yeah, for Candace. Did that person qualify, that family qualify?
We don't
For your voucher
have
program.
any preferences on our waiting list for homeless. And people can only apply from our program when the waiting list is open. Currently, we have close to 1,400 people on our waiting list. So, you know, the next time it opens, that family would be able to apply. But we don't have any homeless preferences.
We have a question right here.
Going back to the homeless program, so like when you do your searching through, do you go back to these shelters, or how do you verify that that they're indeed homeless to the standards?
So we pull our participants off of a prioritization list that is managed by United Way. So usually they are put on that list by outreach workers. So those are the people that's going out to the homeless city, is what we call it, where the tents are. Or they're already working with transitions, the pods downtown, or like the sister care and things like that. Because we have to be able to verify that you are in that current situation.
Is there an enrollment window that happens for your program that begins and ends? First, I'll stop right here. I'll let you answer that.
So what we try to do is when we open the waiting list, we try to only accept enough applications that it's gonna last for 2 years. The waiting list that we have now is a little bit older than that because we had another priority waiting list that we had to work through. So the next time the waiting list is open, well, I can tell you the last time that it was open, we only kept 3,000 of the applicants. We did a lottery. I think we had over 10,000 applicants in a day and a half. So there is a great need out there. This waiting list, we are actually going through what we call a purge right now, which means we've sent letters out to all of the families that are on that list to make sure that they're still interested so that we have a better success rate when we reach out to them. I do anticipate, because today was the last day for them to respond, I anticipate that list to be dwindled down significantly and then possibly reopening within the next 12 months.
So it's an annual?
It's not an annual thing. The last time it was actually physically opened was in December of 2019.
Any other questions? Yes.
I don't have a question this time, but I do have a comment. First, I want to say thank you to the staff, all of you for what you're doing. And I remember a few years ago when they started doing the webinars and everything. I remember when you came on, Ms. Hardy, we've been apart, we've been using, way back when it was Section 8. So we've been a part of the program for a very long time as landlords, and it's getting better and better. And so we appreciate what you all are doing, even though, and I'm glad to hear about the rent increases. I was so glad to see that. So we just kind of hung in there, just hoping that, things were gonna come around, and just so glad that they did. And I'm glad to hear about your homeless program, because I had no idea. I mean, I read I've been reading the brochures, the newsletter, yeah, thank you. And that's been really good, but I guess I must have forgot about that part and didn't focus in on it, but I think that's really great. Good to know.
Maybe we need to write something about it in the newsletter.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you. But, keep up with the webinars and cause I do, and then the little links, I don't know if everybody knows, but comes right to my text, and I can open it up and see what's going on, in the housing authority, so thank you all.
You guys can sign up for our newsletter, and if you wanna indicate, if you wanna put your email address, on the sign-in sheet near your name, then we can make sure that you get it, the email address isn't already there.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Our staff is really committed to providing housing in Columbia and Richland County. And it's good to hear from good feedback that you're appreciative of what we do, and we really do work hard to provide good housing and work hard to work with our landlords also. So, is there anything else? Any other questions? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you all very much for being here. The food is still out there. Do we still have food, guys? Okay.